first start 3D printing, it's very tempting to just start putting your shapes together in your CAD program. But before you do that, it's very important that you think about what size or what scale does your object need to be. If you don't, you may have planned to create this and wind up with this, or even with this. So it's important to think about what size does my object need to be before I begin my design. So how then do we decide exactly what size something should be, or what size something is? Well, there's some people in the world who can just kind of look at things and just sort of know. Maybe they've done enough measuring in their lives. They just know that that is about 55 millimeters. For other people, including me, it always helps if you just get out a ruler. And so if I'm designing an object, say a toy car, and I think, oh, I want it to be about this big, I can just get the ruler and see, okay, about how many millimeters is that? And then I'll know, okay, I need to make my car 120 millimeters, for example. Other times I need to have a precise measurement because I'm trying to replace a part or make something a very precise size. And in those cases, obviously, I need to measure what size I need. Now there's actually a tool that's even more precise than a ruler called calipers that can be very useful in 3D printing because I'm able to measure very precisely to the fraction of a millimeter what size I want something to be. So if I have a screw, for example, that I'm replacing and I need it to fit in this very particular hole, I don't just need to know, oh, it's about 20 millimeters. I need to know exactly 22.3 millimeters, for example, and calipers will allow me to do that. So in 3D printing, we almost always use millimeters. Most rulers that you buy here in the United States, you have one side that has inches and one side that has centimeters or millimeters. And in 3D printing, we almost always use the millimeter because it's a smaller unit of measurement. And it's a whole lot easier to say, I want something to be 1 millimeter than to say, oh, I want it to be 0.039 inches. Okay, so it's a lot easier to use millimeters, and so we almost always use millimeters in 3D printing. And another thing, this is 3D printing. So what exactly are the 3Ds, or the 3 dimensions? Okay, so we have the length and the width and the height. And everything I design, everything I print, I need to think about those 3 dimensions, the length, the width, and the height. And those are important when determining size. Now we usually refer to those with some letters. So we usually refer to the horizontal as being the X direction, okay, the vertical as being the Y direction, and the up and down as being the Z direction. And you can see on the 3D printer, it can move in 3 different directions. It can move side to side, that's the X direction. It can move forward to backward, that's the Y direction. Or it can move up and down in height, and that's the Z direction. So there are a few important things you need to think about when you're designing the size of your object. So the first thing you want to think about is the size of your printer. And so most 3D printers, like the ones that people have in their homes, can print about 200 millimeters in all 3 directions. So for example, this Creality Ender 3 here can print 220 millimeters in the X direction, 220 millimeters in the Y direction, and up to 250 millimeters in the Z direction. And so you want to make sure that whatever you design fits within that space. Otherwise, you're going to have to figure out how you can piece your object together if you want to create something much larger than that. Usually people think only about not making it too big, but it's also possible with a printer to make something too small for it to print. So the nozzle of a 3D printer is 0.4 millimeters. Now you can buy different nozzles of different sizes, but that's the standard size, 0.4 millimeters. Now that sounds very tiny, but it's still possible if you're trying to design something that's intricate that those details will be too fine for the printer to print. So be sure that whatever you print is large enough for the nozzle to print, but small enough for the printer to be able to hold. So another thing you want to think about when you think about the size that you make your object is how much filament it's going to use. So everything you print uses a certain amount of filament. That's the plastic that's in the 3D printer. And the bigger the object, the more filament you use. And so big objects can get very expensive very quickly. That just also can be a waste of resources if you're printing something that you just really aren't going to use or need for very long. So your slicing software will actually show you how much filament your project will use. So after you have sliced it, you can find that information down at the bottom. It will show you here that the filament used is 32.7 grams. So the typical rolls of filament that we buy are about 1,000 grams. So you can see what percentage of a roll that would be. And the cost of this project then would be about 65 cents. Obviously that can vary a little bit depending on how much the filament was that I am using, but this will give you a good estimate of what it would cost. And another thing, printing large objects obviously takes more time. So a printer prints layer by layer by layer by layer. So very large prints take lots and lots of layers. So be sure too to look at the amount of time a particular print is going to take before you start it. You might find that it's going to take 56 hours, and you want to think about whether it's really worth that amount of time before you start a large print. So my slicing software will also show me about how much time it will take. So after I have sliced it, again down at the bottom here, I can see that the estimated printing time for this project would be 3 hours and 21 minutes. Finally, a quick recap. It's important when you 3D print anything that you think about the size, the scale at which you're printing before you start. Be sure to use a ruler or calipers to measure so that you have a good idea of what the size will be. Also, be sure to think about the capabilities of your printer. Make sure it's not too large or too small. Also, think about how much filament it's going to use. Don't waste filament on big projects that you really don't want. And along with that, think about how much time it's going to take to actually complete the print. Your slicing software will tell you the amount of filament and the amount of time, so be sure and look at that before you send your design to the printer.